Raucous crowd tonight. Hello. Thank you. Sorry. Good evening. Welcome to our first business meeting of the 2019-2020 school year. I'd like to welcome everyone and acknowledge that tonight we are meeting on the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nations. Do we have any additions or deletions to tonight's agenda? No? Any changes in order? Seeing none, I will seek a motion to approve, please. From Trustee Stanley, Trustee Barron. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Item number 6, the minutes. Motion to approve, please. Trustee McKay, Trustee Stanley. Thank you. All right, we have a few all in favor? Sorry. All right, carried. We have a few presentations tonight. First up, Assistant Superintendent Dr. Bob Ethlinger regarding AP 516 environmental initiatives.
Good evening, through the chair. So behind me, we have 3 very inspiring people. And I'm going to get them just to introduce themselves and tell you who they're affiliated with. Just name and what you do. Because these 3 people first brought this issue around this AP, this Administrative Procedure for Environmental Initiatives, to my attention with a request. But I'll get them first just to introduce themselves and then I'll carry on.
I'm Shelley Serbrin. I have just recently retired this September from the School District 68, and so I taught in both elementary and secondary here for 15 years.
Thank you.
And I'm Kate Reynolds, and I taught for over 30 years, and my last school was Gabriola Elementary, and I've been retired for 2 years.
My name is Michelle McEwen. I'm the general manager at the recycling organization Gyro on Gabriola, and I've been teaching an environmental education program at the elementary school for about 5 years.
Thank you. So these fine people approached me last fall and asked if there was any appetite to have a conversation about could we create a policy for recycling in schools, I believe is how the conversation first started. So then I thought, well, I don't know that we have a policy or admin procedure for recycling in schools. So we had a conversation. I took the information to facilities, had a conversation with Pete Sabo and Rob Lumsden, and lo and behold, we had one that was on the book since 1996 called Environmental Initiatives. And it was the district's, again, forward thinking at the time, 1996, to have a district procedure, or it was a policy at that time, a district policy that would guide the district in recycling, in I always have trouble with that word, when we purchase materials for building or what have you, that this would be our guide to say that we would do it in an environmentally conscious, environmentally sound way. So it sat there and facilities used it in their work. So when this came forward, it's like, well, can we maybe just update it a bit? CETSAS had just been approved months prior. So I thought, why don't we merge these together? So we continue to have conversations talking about place-based education in our schools, outdoor ed programs. Like, the conversation can just go so many places. But if you bring it all back, it's how do we respect the land on which we live, work, and play? And what things can we do around recycling, for example? Waste reduction, all of those conversations. So then we started tweaking the language, and I was just doing it with them, and then eventually when I got to a certain place, I thought, well, I need to take this, kind of let it out of the bag. So I had a conversation with Pete and Rob Lumsden, and the way I was thinking it would go is that Pete would then take it here. This would be Pete tonight, explaining to you why he thought there should be changes to this environmental initiatives administrative procedure. However, I got Pete's blessing just to continue working on it and updating it, and then having conversations, and then share it with you and senior staff. And so here we are tonight. And I'd say the last 3 weeks have been pretty incredible in terms of, Tim, our Deputy Superintendent, Davey, approached me and said, would you be prepared to bring it to the board before you go? And I said, well, absolutely. But what that spurred on was the finishing touches, because I didn't think it would be me making them. But I took it on, and I made contact with a university professor from Simon Fraser University, who Kate put me in contact with, and this professor is running a project out of Gabriola Elementary. And they're doing a place-based learning project, and it's directly connected to the type of work that we're wanting around recycling and honoring the land and being good stewards of the land. So I reached out to him and we had a conversation. I sent him the work I had done, or we had done up to that point, and he sent back some suggestions. And he challenged my thinking in terms of, is this environmental education, which is a whole broad thing, or is this really focused on respecting and being stewards of the land? Because if you are, then you can grow anything, you can respect the land, and you can make sure that it stays healthy and it grows. So it still includes everything, but the focus is different. And then we educate students around being good stewards of the land, which fits so perfectly with, it gave me goosebumps that it fits so well with Sayetsas. And you can still use stewardships of the land in a broad way, because it can also be interpreted on many different levels. So I took his suggestions, wove them in, and then I was asked to put the action sheet together for tonight. So then it just fit together so well. I think there are some lines in that action sheet that I'm very proud of, and they're not necessarily mine, it's from conversation, but talk about gelling and talk about fitting together so nicely. So I hope that's really all I'm going to say about what you have in front of you. I hope that you are as impressed with the work and the initiative that these fine people brought forward, and that Facilities is embracing this 100%. Rob was hoping to be here tonight to say a few words, but couldn't be for his own reasons. But they are 100% behind this, and the word required shows up in the administrative procedure, that schools are required to follow this administrative procedure. And those come from our own staff in Facilities. So that shows you that they're behind this 100% and are willing to assist the district in making sure that this flies. There are many conversations to be had and much to do around procedure to put this into place. We have to identify if there are costs, what those would be, how to fit those into next budget year, because this budget's already earmarked. So that's future. And right now it's draft being presented to you. I'll stop there.
Do you have any questions? Trustee McKay, and then
Through the chair, to start, I find it interesting, after so many years of working with you, that you used the word required. That's not a word that we've used very often, but I really appreciate its use here. So thank you for that. My question is, I'm wondering if the Sayetsas family has had a chance to review this procedure through their lens before it becoming implemented?
Through the chair. It is one of the questions that has been brought forward since this draft got to this stage. So no, that has not happened, and I think that would need to occur, as you are suggesting, before it gets to to the end of the process.
Okay, Trustee Keller?
Thank you. So I'd just like the chair to say thank you to the staff and to the group who worked to put this piece together. My question is whether or not it was an intentional decision or maybe an oversight to not talk at all about climate change or greenhouse gas emissions, as those are inherently linked to the land.
Through the chair. That was my thinking about having the environmental word in there, because to me that brought us off the land and brought in the other parts of the environment and the issues that we're dealing with around climate change and many of the others. So when, in my brief interaction with this professor from SFU, he said we could do one of two things. We could do both land and environment and just broaden the whole thing, but you'd have to explain all that. Mm-hmm. Or you could stick with just one thing and have everything stem from it, is basically my understanding of what he was telling me. So I thought the one thing would be the land and everything stems from it. So that's where it was a conscious decision to do that.
Ms. Wood, and then Trustee Barron.
Thank you through the chair. I want to thank the folks that you have working with them. I worked with Shelley and Kate for a number of years, and I know how passionate they are about this issue. I do have a question. You've talked about procurement in terms of facilities. Yeah, I practiced. Would it also extend to schools in terms of the supplies that they're purchasing? And I'm thinking in particular of paper products, because I'm aware that cheaper paper products come from Indonesia, but I have recently become aware of how devastating the deforestation and the effects on the indigenous populations in Indonesia, for example. And I know schools have been purchasing paper from Indonesia. So would it extend to that? And I hope the answer is yes.
Yeah, through the chair. I'm hoping the answer is going to be yes also. When I think of how this rolls out, I keep thinking that, you know, is it 1 page or 2 page, the draft? It's 2, 1 and a bit,
One
right?
and a bit, yeah.
So I'm thinking that there would be then included in that, as we digest these issues, that we would be specific about how we're going to address them. So we could, again, I think there's a whole lot of people need to have a whole lot of conversations to get there, but definitely I'm hoping also that those things will be included within.
Thank you.
When I think of the procedure, I keep thinking of adding to it about how we do things, because admin procedure means it gives us the guidelines for how we're going to do things in our facilities, in our sites, in our schools. So I would hope that it could be articulated very clearly within the AP through time as we sort these things out.
Great, thank you. Trustee Barron and then Trustee Stanley.
Thank you through the chair. Thank you for all the great work that you've put together to make this happen and for your time on this. This looks great. I'm excited about it. I think there's lots of great things around this, and I think it's moving in a steady, great direction, so I'm happy to see. I don't think you spoke to it, but I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the committees that you're talking about in this procedure around the board endorses the formation of a site-based stewardship initiative committee, green teams. Mm-hmm. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Sure, through the chair. Again, there have been many conversations about, so how is it actionable? Like how do we make this actionable? So each site needs to be active in making sure that this is implemented. So that was just an example of a green team, but it would be a broad representation on the green team, and they would be able to deal with issues at their site, but also if they have questions or issues that are bigger than their site, then there's a process in there, just a lineage that the team would bring it to the principal would bring it to their assistant superintendent, who would then bring it to senior staff to facilities. We thought originally that maybe it would go directly from the green teams to facilities. Mm-hmm. And then we rethought that, thinking everything in our district has a similar process that we go through. in a school, if staff have concerns or issues, it goes to the principal, who then brings it forward. So we wanted to keep the same chain of command, and not tie facilities with addressing 38, 39 site-based committees, green teams, in addition to everything else that they do. But those finer details still need to be ironed out. But the green teams would be, those people who are keenly interested in making this happen in their school.
Great. If I could just follow up.
You may.
I do like that this is in draft form and it's moving us in the right direction. I'm thinking forward to the work that we're doing through the policy committee, through our strategic plan that's in the process of being finalized, and how this is all going to tie in together and be interconnected. And my thoughts are that this could be, revamped and continued to be improved upon based on the work that's being done in those as well, considering points, as Trustee Keller pointed out and so on. But I think that this is a great foundation, and I'm happy to see it in draft form.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. That was more of a comment. Apologies.
Trustee Stanley.
I could go on. I heart place-based education written on the top of my piece of paper here. Sorry, I'm gonna need to get my eco-friendly tissue box ready. Okay, here we go. Trustee Barron kind of asked my question. I did wonder about why we're going to site-based rather than perhaps district-based, and do wonder if in the future we want to consider a district level and or some form of joint committee with, a broader community level. Those are just some of the thoughts I have. I am so profoundly grateful for this. I wept when I read this. I am tearing now. I personally feel like this is a gift. I thank you and you and everybody on behalf of our children, on behalf of our trees, on behalf of our land, on behalf of my heart. I don't see this as an end, but I think it is an incredible right step. So I am grateful for so many pieces in this, and look forward to how we continue to move forward on it. And as I said, I was really profoundly grateful for things like site-based education and just, place-based education. I won't even go into it. If I can, shift the conversation a little bit in the sense that our language is important. And I view as, like being environmental, we talk about it isn't something that we do, or it can be something that we do, tick, right? We did the recycling. I would like us to shift, and I don't mean to look at you, Bob, I mean to look at the room in our thinking in our school district, shift from it as a doing to a being. So rather that it is incorporating, I would like to incorporate this into our worldview and understand, and at the core of it, that we are intrinsically tied, connected to the land. So when we talk about stewardship, I'm stuck with the word stewardship in our strategic plan, because I don't. Sometimes that could mean that we have a sense of responsible ownership, and I want us to move away from that, but rather into a recognition that what happens to the land also happens to us, and that our stewardship needs to be come from a place of honoring the land, and that we are physically and mentally or psychologically dependent upon the land. So, this notion that we talk about, we are all connected. This is what it is. So I'm hoping that our language, because stewardship, I looked up definitions, and it can go either way, but I'm hoping that we can reflect that sense of connectivity, much in the way, as you identified, that our SAETSIS policy is very much so lovely connected with environmental stewardship, as well as starting to think about how assessment and instruction is so much, very much connected into this. And that's where I was appreciative for the place-based, because I think that those three goals are fundamentally intertwined. So I am grateful. I just hope that we can kind of shift ourselves to viewing this as a sense of connectivity to land. And I think we've done this, or we're getting there, but sometimes we just have to take our minds and put them into a slightly different place. So, thank you I think this is phenomenal. I wanted to send this to my old school district and say, na, 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 na. And to all the other trustees that I know, I will stop talking because I will go on forever, and I
I was
just can't.
just about to
Oh,
gently wrap you up.
thank you.
Yeah, I was about, yeah. All right, any other questions for Dr. Essinger before we move forward with this one? Okay. All right, well, thank you for that, and I actually, I do want to say, in the last, I guess, 10 years, I've really gotten to understand the importance of these kinds of procedures and policies, and this is some excellent work, and I thank you, and I think that you can see this as one of the many legacies you're going to leave behind as you retire, so thank you for that work.
Thank you. If I could,
Yes,
Madam
you may,
Chair.
of course.
I want to make a notable mention of our facilities department, specifically Diane Bunna and Rob Lumsden, under of course, the leadership of Pete Sabo. But they have been going it alone, actually, for the last number of years, and trying to get recycling going in our schools, and trying this and trying that. And they've done amazing things in facilities. So maybe if I could plant a little seed, maybe you would like to hear from them directly what initiatives they have going on over there and in our school district, and of course you would in the process of bringing this forward. So I just wanted to have a shout out to them.
I appreciate that. Yes? Mr.
So
Sabo?
if I could, this is Dr. Eslinger's last meeting with the board, and if I could, take a couple minutes to call on Deputy Superintendent Davey to say a couple words from the Learning Services Department. Okay.
Thank you. And,
He has one
Chair.
recommendation.
Does he?
Would I-
Oh, sorry. Whoa. Sorry, I forgot the. Let me just forget
Back that
what
up.
you just heard.
Back that up for a minute. He's
Bob's
going
going to present again.
I was
Right? Are you in
wondering.
here later? You're not. You are. Oh, okay. Thank you. I thought it was.
Yeah, you're here for this next.
I'm okay. Sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry, Mr.
Jumping
Davey.
the gun. So, Dr. Esslinger, we're going to move on then. I think we've, unless you had anything else you want to say?
This is his last one.
Yeah.
Is he presenting with you?
Yes.
Okay, this is it.
Yeah, this is it.
Oh, this is it.
Mr. Davey. Carry on, Mr. Davey.
Oh, that
Thank
was.
you.
Rewind the archive. Appreciate through the chair. Just like to take a brief moment to thank Dr. Esslinger for his continued dedication, service, and support throughout our district here. We've determined, I think it's 33 years that you've been in education, 29 and a half years of those years of service have been to the Nanaimo Basin Public Schools, and we are the benefactors of your ongoing commitment and expertise and the provision of service to our students and staff here. So, Dr. Esslinger, thank you very much. We wish you all the best as you move forward. We know that you're not going to be far away. You'll be next door, but we will be missing you greatly, and thank you again for everything you provided for our district. So, appreciate that.
Thank you. Just a few words. I owe my livelihood to this place for the last 29 and a half years. It's been an awesome place to work, and the boards have been very supportive of the work of student services through all those years, and this board is no different, continuing the same. So I thank you very, very much, and I have 29 and a half years of wonderful memories to take away with me. And you're in good hands. I know that everything will progress the way it should, so thank you very much.
Well, can I just add 30
Yes,
seconds?
of course.
On a personal note, Bob, thank you for all your knowledge and advice over the years. Bob came to the district a little bit before me, but in 1994 I came here as a TTOC. We worked together for a little bit at Dover Bay, and in 1996 Bob convinced me to go for coffee one evening, and convinced me at that point to do my master's, which we did our master's together, which changed my life. We also arrived at the board office in the role of assistant superintendent at the very same time. And I know you supported me in a great way, great deal through that time. And I want to personally thank you for all that you've done. And you take with you a vast amount of knowledge about this place, and we're going to miss that. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Well, all right. Thank you.
Already
On that
voting
note, I'm going to ask Ms. Brown to come forward, and she's going to give us an update on community schools.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you. See ya. Thank you. See you, Kate.
Through the chair, thank you for this opportunity to provide you with an update. As you may know, I have had laryngitis for the past week, so this is my big voice today. And don't ask me too many questions or it may just fade away to nothing. This is just a brief update on how we're doing with the community school coordinators. So there's just a few slides to go through just to keep you up to date about some of the changes that we've made. So you may remember, by way of background, that when these positions were created, that they were intended to have an input or an impact on enhancing student learning, and that they were meant to be a direct link to all activity to student learning. That the intent was to provide some coordination around service delivery. And what we've learned lately is that schools are the sites that families, especially vulnerable families, are feeling most safe to access services. So any opportunity to bring services into our school is one that increases parent participation and access for all. The community hub was both a place and a set of partnerships between the school and community resources. Its integrated focus was supposed to be on academics, health and social services, youth and community development, and community engagement, and that this leads to improved student outcomes. So, coming from Nanaimo, I've worked in Nanaimo since 1992. I have a few partners in our community, and consistently what I had been hearing was it had been a challenge for community partners to know how to get into the school district. How are we going to get this good information or this good programming into our schools? What's the best number, who's in charge, and how does it work? So looking at the 5 school coordinators, previously they were attached to specific schools. And so what we've done is we took a look at board goals and board priorities and reorganized the work that the 5 coordinators are doing and developed over time their portfolios. So we shifted from being site specific. So instead of a coordinator generating money and providing services for a specific school, that we changed them to being district-wide so that they're responsible for programming throughout our district. Our intent down the road is to take them out of their individual schools where they've been located throughout the district, bring them together and co-locate them at Dufferin, where they'll have an opportunity to partner with our learning coordinators that have similar portfolios. So we start kind of amassing this team effect and having kind of more hands on deck with this different focus and priority. We engaged in a process of identifying the portfolio focus, and then we actually left the room and let the school coordinators choose which domain they felt most passionate about. So each person who's attached to each priority, that was their individual choice. So we have Susan McGonigal, who chose food security. So that means all of our food programs anything to do with food. District-wide, again, we have a single point of contact. So, for example, in the past, if there was a breakfast club that wanted to get going in our schools, they were having to contact 5 different coordinators to get that program running. Now they'll have one person, Susan. Basha chose outdoor education and environmental sustainability. She has a passion for things like gardens and cycling and all those outdoor activities. Bernadette chose mental health and wellness, which of course for me is an easy win, so I have been connecting her with my network. Veronica Bach chose Indigenous education and student success, and Michelle chose early years. And I think it's of note to say that almost each one of these domains is something new for these coordinators. They're not previously coming from a strong background in these different fields, so they're taking on a new challenge and they're having a new focus. So there's some energy around that. So our principles around what kind of programming are we bringing in is really around equity. We want to have the same types of opportunities in Ladysmith as we do at Seaview. As you know, it can be very difficult, for example, to get your certification in something or other when you're in Ladysmith because it all seems to be kind of central Nanaimo. So we're doing all our planning with these types of principles in mind. And I'll speak a little more towards this access for all. We have a goal over this next year. This next year is our year to adjust. This is a big change for the coordinators. One of our goals, really partnering with finance, Keely, has been around removing any cost for programming associated with School District 68. So this is kind of an exciting idea. We really had a hard think about what are we doing here. We're meant to be providing programming for our most vulnerable families and students. And if we have things that are certification, food safe, serve it right, babysitting, what have you, first aid, those can be costly endeavors to get certified in. What if we removed all the cost? So we're moving towards this over this year. So the grant writing will be focused around generating funds. We have a pool already that we can start doing this. In fact, we have our first aid course coming up in October that we're not charging for. It has been a little bit overwhelming, the interest. So we'll be sorting through how seats are selected and chosen. But removing the cost has definitely, we feel quite passionately about programming that we bring in not costing anyone. So the school coordinators have been busy and active up until now, and there are projects and things that they've been working on that they've developed some expertise. The fact that they have a focus doesn't mean that their previous activities have gone by the wayside. So it's just that moving forward that we're going to have a little bit more of a specific entry point and we'll have the portfolio, but it doesn't mean that what they've been able to do in the past is going to get lost. In fact, we're engaging in this incredibly complicated process right now whereby they're sorting out all the different things that they've done and saying, this fits more in your portfolio, so I'm going to connect you with that person, and this fits more with yours. So it's remarkably complicated. I had no idea that there were so many varieties and different partnerships and linkages, but we're sorting that out. And what I've said to them is, let's take this school year to kind of get our ducks in a row and aim for kind of something a little more structured by the end of June, so that we kind of take the pressure off, because there was a huge reaction to changing up all of their work. So we're taking the pressure off and saying this is our year to get ourselves organized and to do things that make sense given the new lay of the land. So there are 5 of them. Each one of them gets 1 hour of individual supervision with me a month to go through their individual portfolios and make recommendations about what they're doing as an individual coordinator. So that's 5 hours of supervision a month, and then we have an hour and a half a month where we're meeting as a group. So with the 40 staff that I have put these guys at the top of my priority list in terms of support and partnering, and I actually think that we will get there by June and have kind of another opportunity to stand and say, here's what we've done this year, but this is kind of the update about how the different changes that we've made and how we're doing so far.
As long as there's very good questions, does anybody else want me to add them to the list? Trustee Barron? Anyone else? Okay, Mr. Barron, then Trustee Barron.
Thank you, to the chair, to the presenter. I'm a little taken back by this, as this stuff has all been done without our notion. The executive is and I say the stewardship of the collective agreement. Major changes to job descriptions and other things need to come through us. And here we are presented with stuff that's been determined. And I'm going to say very clear in public, that is another slap back at us. Those individuals work for the employer, but the employer's invested interest is a collective agreement between the union and the people that provide the service. Because if things are done in here that could affect others or meetings going forward, we need to be aware of it, and I was not aware of any of this.
Trustee Barron?
Thank you for the chair. I have a few questions, so maybe you could add me back on the list,
Yes.
but I'll just start. First of all, Ms. Brown, thank you for this presentation and update around what's happening in community schools. Appreciate that. I'm happy to see quite a few things in here. I do like how the positions have been aligned with the new strategic plan, so that's really nice to see. I also am quite happy with the portfolios that are being emphasized, so that's nice to see. You had said in there, in your presentation, that the programs would no longer be costing the students who are using the programs, which I think is wonderful and great news. Could you speak a little bit to the process of how the coordinators are going to be raising the funds to cover those costs? I know before they were individually, perhaps it wasn't clear to me when you were speaking, but before they were applying for grants for their individual zones, and now they're going to be in a district model. How is that process going to be unfolding for them to apply for funds and also manage their funds? Because I know those were two areas that were looked at before.
Okay, through the chair. My understanding is that the process is pretty much the same in terms of generating funds, writing grants, applying for funding. We have support from finance around how to organize the money that they do generate. It's being carefully tracked through the different portfolios, so we know what has come in for what. And that portion of their position really hasn't changed. We took away the financial accountability. There was a lot of their time was spent around making deposits and banking and budgeting and things like that. So we have a new kind of agreement and partnership with finance. So that's not any part of their concern anymore. They're able to focus on their portfolio and their topic and their area, actually. So the grant writing is the same. In fact, I just met with them today, and they're supporting each other and writing grants as they always have.
Thanks. Through the chair, thanks for your presentation and all the work you're doing. This has been something that we've talked about for many years, and so it's nice to see the work progressing the way it is. My question is around when we were reading the reports last year from, what was the consultant's name? Anyway, I can't remember. And also in our, out and about being connected with schools that have had community schools coordinators, the important work that they did in connecting with vulnerable families and helping those kids. And what we talked about in our meeting when we talked about reworking the job description was that is actually the work of the child and youth support workers. So I'm just wondering if, when we've taken these folks out of the school, which is, I'm not questioning that, I'm just wondering if we've made sure that each of those schools is connected. Now, I can't remember if they all had one anyway, but do they all have a child and youth support worker now connected to them as well?
So through the chair, Each one of our schools has a child youth family support worker connected to their school. They also get support and consultation from me. So in fact, on Monday, when we have our first of the year work-alike meeting for child youth family support workers, the community school coordinators are going to be highlighted as their partners. So the idea is really around organizing the work in a way that makes sense and allows for efficiency. So again, instead of phoning 5 coordinators to get food, there's one person. So the partnership between the child youth family support workers who are at individual schools, they will know who their coordinator is based on their domain. Absolutely. Okay. And when we think about not charging for programs and we get a giant roster of applicants, it is the child youth family support workers who have been identified as helping us identify from that list who are our most vulnerable and appropriate candidates for those programs.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Trustee Killer and then back to Trustee Barron.
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation. One of my questions that I had is, I remember hearing from the consultant and last year, and some of the metrics that were used to sort of measure the success of the community school coordinators, in my view, didn't make a lot of sense because it was focused a lot on academics. And I see that that word is still in the presentation, so I'm wondering sort of what your thoughts are around how we might measure the success of the sort of amended structure of our community school program.
Through the chair, thank you. Excellent question. I think we're going to be looking at efficiencies. So, we could measure the number of programs that we're bringing in that actually line up with board goals and board priorities. One of the things that will naturally happen as we get more focused is things that are not appropriate are going to fall to the wayside. So we won't have likely clogging or balloon animals or anything that doesn't fit with your priorities showing up in our, I'm sorry, that's the way I roll, it's always something funny, showing up, but that we are actually focused on the types of programs that you have determined as being purposeful. Because there's a lot that are outside of board goals, safe to say.
Trustee Barron. Thank you through the chair. I'm stuck on balloon animals and clogging, and I want to know how I can get involved. They sound fun. Trustee Higginson actually had addressed, and you had responded, some of the question that I had. I think you may have responded to all of it, but I guess I wanted to just get some clarification around how this model would continue to address the needs of those most vulnerable within our district. And I heard you say that, and Trustee Higginson brought up the child youth family support workers and their role, and so I appreciate that. Is there anything else that will be put into place, I guess, strategically to ensure that we're not just, because I feel it's great to look at ensuring that we have programs distributed, that's a quality in my mind of access. Yeah. But more importantly to me is the equity of ensuring that we're putting those resources where most needed to ensure our most vulnerable students are offered the same educational opportunities throughout the district. So that's, in my mind, was the purpose of community schools, and I just wanted to make sure that that was still a focus and that wouldn't get lost in this process of having that as an emphasis within this program. I guess I was hoping you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, I one of the opportunities that I have is what I do in the district. So being the hub for all school counselors, all child youth family support workers. I'm at every principal's meeting, and my day-to-day practice is really around seeing all of those people in their schools. So I'm usually out to about 4 different schools a day and just seeing people who report to me, seeing them where I say in their natural environment, like go and see them where they work. So I feel very, like I have a unique opportunity to be quite connected. I think that as we go through this and the clogging and balloon animals fall up to the side, one of the opportunities that we may have is actually demonstrating these are the types of programs that we're bringing in, so we can stand behind them and represent them. Then through, again, school counselors, child and family support workers, and admin actually being able to identify and match those kids with those opportunities. This idea about equity is actually kind of a neat idea when you think about a place like Cedar or a place like Seaview that often gets missed, a place like Pleasant Valley that, you know, there are pockets that are outside of previously identified high needs areas where there's actually quite a lot of vulnerable folks. So I think that I keep saying to the coordinators, you need to be, I keep saying, I'm going to stand in front of the board. We need to be able to demonstrate that what we're doing in one area is showing up everywhere else. And that has really helped them, you know, be organized and be strategic around that so that we're not missing. Previously, we were very, you know, service, I would say, intensive in very small pockets. But Nanaimo's big and Ladysmith is big and Cedar's there too. So how do we show up, and how can I come here and say to you, look, what we're offering is something that's going to be available to somebody who doesn't have a vehicle and goes to North Oyster. That's my intent.
Thank you. Any other questions before I ask one? Okay. And you kind of maybe just hit on it a bit, but and Trustee Barron sort of hit on it. And it may be too soon for you to really to explain this, but you said programs and services won't, from like last year, won't be lost, or previous initiatives aren't going to be lost. Do you have it, and you can't tell me what the system is going to be in place to ensure that at this point yet, or you're still working through that?
Through the chair. Actually, the coordinators carry that.
Okay.
They are remarkably passionate and caring and are striving to do a good job, and they will not let anything go that worked well. And what I've said to them, because their first response was to seize up and think that I was, you know, going to come and rearrange anything. No, this is just the focus of your portfolio. It doesn't mean that you're not doing all those other things that filled your cup, so to speak, or that worked really well. I'm not asking to let go of the symphony, for example. We're still attached to the symphony. I was hearing about that today. So that may not fit in anyone's right domain, but it's a passion of Michelle. So Michelle is our symphony coordinator. So the fact that she has early years doesn't mean that she's not going to keep the stuff that worked really well, that's good for kids, that we need to not lose track of.
Okay, and a follow-up to that then. This new system, certainly I can see how it will, and I guess the answer is the child and youth care workers to a certain extent, but this system will certainly help us figure out what the community has to offer and what the community is calling for and needs. But parents, say, who have an interest in seeing something for a program for their kids or kids call it coming with an idea of, you know, we don't have this, or you know, how can we access this? If eventually the child and youth workers are not physically in the schools, if they're located at a different, how are they going to get the opportunity to be in schools, meeting parents and teachers and kids, and finding out, you know, what the different communities are like, and the different school communities are like, and what their values are, what their needs are, and what makes them unique in terms of the challenges that they're facing. And
yeah, the chair, I think that that's an excellent point. And this notion about staying connected is something that I'm hearing loud and clear that I'll be a priority for sure.
Okay.
I have work-alike meetings with all of my groups once a month. There's all kinds of, you know, I don't want to use TV language, crossover cameos that are possible, but there's a lot of interaction there's a lot of potential there to bring folks together. The goal ultimately is to have them at Dufferin and partnered with those learning coordinators who are in schools, hearing from teachers and whatnot about different things that are needed. They get to come back and within their team develop those priorities as they go forward.
okay, thank you. Thank you. What did I miss? Did you have another one?
Got something?
Okay. What was that? Superintendent Davey, did you?
Sorry, if you said the comments, I'd just like to finish off if I may. Whenever you're ready.
Okay. Yeah, please.
Did we, hi,
Hi.
did we change the job description?
No, not at all.
Did we change what they do in a great way, or just organize them differently?
No, it's just organizing. It's the same, their activities are the same.
Okay, could I ask that you include QP, Rob Severe, in anything that requires significant change?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mr. Davey? Okay.
There's a question.
Okay, yes.
Can I just would like to make a comment that I do appreciate that it's going to be spread more across the district.
Because I think that while I understand we definitely needed the community coordinators in the schools they were, every single school has vulnerable students.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes, as a whole, this district really puts judgment on different areas in the city, and I don't think that's fair because, like, every school needs help.
Absolutely.
And there's so many families that will benefit from this. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Okay. Anything else? Trustee O'Neill.
Well, I just, through the chair, want to say, like, change is big, and I see a lot of positive things in here, and I want to, just go back to what, I had similar questions and comments to Superintendent Saywell. But overall, I'm really happy to see the hands-on piece that these coordinators are taking. And I just want to ask you when you think would be a good time to sort of check back in. You mentioned June, but I mean, I'll speak for myself here. I feel very attached to this because this was a big decision that this board made. It is big change, and so I think that it would be appropriate to have you come back and check in. We're just kind of in the new stages of the school years. So any thoughts on that?
Happy to return upon request.
Okay, upon request.
Okay, is it anything else for anyone else? I remembered one thing I wanted to clarify. I just want to make sure that in terms of language that we're understanding each other when we're talking about student learning and connecting it to student learning, that there's an understanding that some things will be causal, like some things will cause improvements in student learning. Some things are just connected to student learning, but you can't draw a direct link, and that's okay. Sometimes it's correlation rather than,
Through the chair, absolutely. So things like wellness initiatives.
Yeah.
Does yoga help in math scores? Probably, right?
Yeah.
But hard to study, hard to link.
Yeah.
So the intent is that, and as I said before, that I'm always able to stand in front of you and give the rationale for why are we doing what we're doing from now forward.
Thank you.
So it isn't balloon animals. It's actually mindful, breathing and relaxation so you can focus during math or what have you, so that they're intentional.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for this presentation, and we put you on the spot a bit didn't mean for that, for your first time speaking, but thank you very much, Lynn, you did a great job. All right.
Thanks,
Next item on our agenda, Ms. McVeigh, Secretary Treasurer and Director of Finance Lowe. Oh, yeah.
Do you mind if I ask a quick
You may.
procedural question related
Yes.
to the agenda?
Yes.
So on the agenda, I note that it's got a recommendation to approve the audited financial statements. And so, but we have, and I think this comes from us still trying on our new surplus policy, because we haven't met yet with our auditors. And so I'm just wondering if there's a requirement for us to approve this, because we have to meet with our auditors as a board. Is there some requirement in our policy that requires this to be done? Because if not, I think I would prefer that we not recommend approval before we meet with our auditors. And I'm sorry I didn't bring this up earlier when we were doing the agenda. I was just looking at it thinking that, and so I know it helps shape the conversation. If there's a recommendation, we tend to focus on that, and that shapes our conversation. Whereas if there's no requirement for us to do that until the board meeting at the end, after we've had that closed meeting with our auditors, I'm looking for
Is it required right now?
No, it's not required, and I agree.
Okay.
Good point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I will now but I will now allow you
Right,
to.
and actually, Director of Finance Kylie Lowe is actually going to do the presentation along with the financial discussion and analysis paper.
All right, I'll turn it over to you then, Carleen. Welcome. I believe this might be your first time with us. Well, welcome.
Speaking with you. So tonight in your package, you received a copy of the 2018-19 financial statements, as well as the financial statement discussion and analysis document. So you notice both of these are in draft form right now. So the auditors will be coming on the September 25th meeting. They will present their audit findings report as well as the audited financial statements, after which there will be a motion to approve the financial statements at that time. So tonight, we just wanted to provide you with the documents in advance so that you had a chance to review them and ask any questions prior to being asked to approve the statements, essentially. So as the auditors are presenting the financial statements at the 25th meeting, tonight I'm just going to do a very high-level overview of the financial statement discussion and analysis document, and focus on the surplus area and then answer any questions that you might have. So on page 66 of your agenda package is the start of the financial statement discussion and analysis document. So this is the district's second time preparing this document, and I think it's really great. It's a way of anybody, not just accountants, being able to actually pick something up and see a summary of the financial results of the year in a way that anyone can understand. So I'll just get you to turn to page 75. So this is just a financial highlight section. As you know, enrollment continues to increase and has been over the past 4 years. This has resulted in an increase in operating funding of $5.2 million from prior year. This page also highlights some of the significant capital projects that have been completed during the year. So that includes the Frank J. Ney Elementary 10 classroom addition, as well as the Hammond Bay Gym expansion. So those are kind of the key highlights of the year. The next section of the document is the financial analysis section, which starts on page 77. So this is really just a variance analysis looking at current year versus prior year, current year versus the amended budget. And we go through that for the statement of financial position as well as the statement of operations. I'm not going to go through variance explanation for each one in detail, but I will get you to turn to page 82, I believe, which is the accumulated surplus balance for the year. So really this is essentially the end result of the year. So I thought we'd focus on this, and then again, if you guys have questions on anything else, then happy to answer those. So as you can see, this table illustrates that the operating fund balance at the end of 2019 has decreased from $7.2 million in the prior year to $4.5 million in the current year. So this is primarily due to a transfer of $4.3 million during the year from the operating fund to local capital. And this was to fund various projects, including unfunded space needs, technology plan, playgrounds, school signs, the Woodlands Vast site, etc. So you'll see that of that $4.5 million, staff is recommending that $2,075,000 be restricted for staffing, CEF supplement, and the Quam schools. So of that $2,075,000, 1.7 is recommended to restrict to cover the Classroom Enhancement Fund staffing monies that have yet to be released by the ministry. So you may recall that 90% was permitted to be recorded, and it's expected that the remaining 10% will be available upon the September 30th enrollment count. So once that's fully funded, then that 1.7 million would be to fund standard contingencies that the district maintains for staffing and replacement costs. And then the remaining 375,000 is recommended to support the startup of the new Quam school. Also included in restricted is 1.1 million for targeted reserve. So this is to cover any projects that may have been started in 2018-19 but not yet finished.
Okay, I will then, Trustee McKay.
If we could go back to the staffing reserve CEF supplement.
Yeah.
The 2,075,000. Sorry, I'm actually looking at note 12 of the audited financial statements because I find that there's too many things combined for calculations in the financial statement.
Okay.
I don't know, this is
That's on page, should I have that written down here? Perfect.
Thank you. So my question is the amounts specifically 950,000 and 750,000, which are the staffing and replacement cost contingencies that are CEF supplements, do those amounts change when they're converted back to staffing contingencies from CEF?
I believe the idea was just to keep it at the 1.7 million, but it's up to you in the end what it gets allocated or how it gets allocated. This is just staff recommendation.
May I follow up?
You may.
Okay, so this is related because I'm trying to do a calculation that I want to confirm I'm doing correctly. Our AP 524, which is our surplus policy, and is not in your package, just so you guys don't go looking for it. It gives us percentages, minimums and maximums for those funds, and it refers to Schedule 2 of the audited financial statements to give us a total expense number, which is the percentage that's based on. Can you please tell me which Schedule 2 it is? Because there's 2A,
Yes.
2B.
I will find
I
the
want to
page
confirm that I'm
number
using
for
the correct
you.
number when I'm making my calculations.
So if you go to page, it doesn't help that the statements are like 40 pages long. So page 53. Document. So I believe the surplus policy is pointing to the budgeted revenue, total revenue of 133 million. So it would be that balance that you would be taking the total restricted divided by that to get the percentage.
The policy or the procedure actually states that it's a percentage of total expenses.
Right.
So which expense is it on this sheet?
If I may.
You may.
What you would be looking at would be the budgeted 2019-20 total operating expenses. And I'm looking at Ms. Lowe and perhaps Ms. Hamley, just to ensure that I have that correct.
Yes, I believe that's correct.
So you wouldn't, so we'd be looking at our 2019-20 budget and say, what's the budgeted total operating expenses? And that would be the calculation on which we would do it. And I don't believe our 19-20 budget is in front of us right now.
Well, there's a line in here on Schedule 2 of unaudited, and it says there's 2019 budget, 2019 actual, 2018 actual. So is the 134 million under 2019 budget, and then it says note 13, is that the expense number I should be using to make my calculations?
Yes, the 134 on Schedule 2.
Yes?
Yes.
That's
that
the correct
should be-
number.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Okay.
And
thank
that's the percentage that I used when I was calculating it as well, or the number.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Trustee Keller, did you have your hand up?
No.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna let you go back then. Unless there was any other questions at this point about any of this. Mr. Zver.
Just one question around the Quam contingency. It's in the 2019 as out. Is there ability to have that money recaptured based on the co-operating of it? Or is that a fund that is an expectation from the district alone?
You're the chair?
Can you tackle that? What you want?
Well, I was
Yeah.
just gonna be more high level, but if anyone wants to be a bit more specific, might be best to come from.
No.
those.
May I just like a clarification?
For sure.
As much as this is designed to be high level, I just would like to clarify that our business committee serves as our audit committee, so we really should be digging in.
Yes.
And allowing our partner groups as well to dig in.
Absolutely.
So I just
Yeah.
want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable asking those questions.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so, can you?
Okay, could you please repeat the question?
I didn't quite hear you either, Rob.
The question is, the $375,000 is from the 2019 operating fund, and it says contingency for Quam. And I asked if that money, was there a way of recapturing it, or is it a direct district result of 2019? Because the 19-20 school year, we don't have a budget for Quam, indicating what revenue may or may not be coming in. But we have an expense here that says it's contingency for something. So all I asked is, was that could that be recaptured based on once we know what the co-op coal piece is and what that funding might be for by the end of the day?
Do you want to answer that question, or I can? Like, I'm trying to fully understand the question. If you're saying, so we've put aside or recommended contingency of $375,000 from the accumulated surplus. If we don't need that, obviously, then that's a good thing. Is that what you're asking? So then,
I'm saying you may have to put the money out today because you don't know what revenue may be coming in tomorrow. All I'm
exactly,
saying
right.
is the contingency is the startup. Is there a way of recapturing or bringing it back in? Because if there is, then really it's just a new point. It's not really a cost to the district.
Correct. Right. Hopefully we don't have to use it, but at this point we don't know what the student funding will be for Quam. And so it was prudent to put aside some monies for the startup.
Okay, Trustee Higginson, did you?
I was just going to say, my understanding of this is that it's the cushion in case, because we've never done this before. And there is, you're right, the possibility of, and lots of co-funding happening. So it's about ensuring that we have, because this has never been done, but can we, if at the end of, if, halfway through the year we're not using it, can we readjust that? That's the whole point of the quarterly reports and the quarterly updates, so that the board can then make decisions about where that money is. It's internally restricted money. So we have the ability to change it halfway through the year if we want to, as we start to understand where the cost is going to be, if we need it at all, if we don't need it. So.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Barron, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. Thank you through the chair. Could staff please provide some background information on page 46 of 110, and also listed in page 88 of 110, it both speaks to it. Could somebody speak to the details around why we are left with unspent school supply budget and Aboriginal education budget? Please.
Through the chair. So unfortunately, I don't have the details on the Aboriginal education budget. I know some of it was contingencies that just didn't get allocated from the prior year, so will be planned and spent going forward. And then there was some unfilled staffing time, I think, as well in there. So that just didn't get spent from the prior, that will hopefully be allocated and spent next year.
Ms. Wood and then Trustee McKay. Oh, sorry.
The school supply budget.
School supply budget, yes.
Yeah, and that's similar. So each school has a supplies budget each year allocated to them. If they don't spend it all, it kind of just rolls forward year over year in it. So that's essentially what that balance makes up.
So just to follow up, is there any way of us being provided with information as to why it was unspent? Though I understand the logistics around it, but perhaps it might be good for us as a board to understand the reasons why we would be carrying a surplus in order to avoid continuing to do so and having that those funds going and being allocated appropriately in that school year rather than being carried over in the future. So perhaps we could be provided with some further information around that at another time if we don't have the answers today.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Unless our
yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, I know Maureen has the answer to this question. Apologies.
I'll give you a little more background on it. And I'll go back like 25 years.
That's why she has the answer.
Provide flexibility in, for schools in when they purchase and what they purchase and everything else. We wanted to create a cushion for them so that they would not feel panicked at the end of the year that they have to spend all of this, because, you know, when we want them to plan and possibly spend and get the goods delivered over the summer for the start of the next school year. So if you look at previous financial statements, you will be able to see that a similar amount has been brought forward every year. And so it's working. They're spending their year's allocation, but they're keeping their cushion, just like having a targeted surplus. And so they're able to properly manage their budgets year after year without going into any panic spending. And they can also save some money, so if they want to do some bigger purchases, they can pool their money and make a purchase every second year or every third year. So there is reason behind the surplus.
Could I just get a clarification around that? Are you speaking to both funding specific to our Aboriginal education and our school supplies together when you're speaking right now?
Not necessarily. The Aboriginal education target is something that we, per the School Act, we have to restrict it. Why it wasn't spent, I think a lot of that was is transition from previous leaders to like someone like Ted, and I know that he has a plan now to try and bring it back in line again so that they're no longer carrying such a large surplus. But they will likely carry a surplus every year as well. It just shouldn't be as high as it is possibly.
Wood, and then Trustee Rankin.
Thank you. So through the chair, I'm looking at page 53, and I'm noticing that there is a difference of about 1.4 million in instruction of what was budgeted and what was actually spent. So the district saved $1.4 million in instructional costs that were budgeted. And I'm wondering if you are able to speak to that at all, or if Ms. Handley is. And also, so that 1.4 million, I suppose, is contributing to our surplus that we now are carrying.
Through the chair?
Yep.
So, sorry, I just want to clarify, you're asking about the 1.4 million difference in instruction expense from the budget, correct?
Correct, yeah.
So there was a variance of 1.4 million from the budget, but our costs were 6.1 million higher than prior year. So the difference from the budget amount is mainly due to the underspend in the Aboriginal education budgets as well as the school supplies, so as Maureen had just explained. And then the remainder of that difference is due to an underspend. So there was positions that were budgeted for that weren't necessarily filled for the full year, so that always ends up giving us a bit of a variance. And then also there was remedy that was budgeted for that wasn't spent, of about $480,000 as well. So that's kind of that difference from the budgeted piece. But the costs themselves did actually increase from the prior year.
So $480,000 in remedy that wasn't spent?
Yeah, it just wasn't owed. So the ministry gave us a set amount of monies to go towards remedy, and that just didn't end up.
It wasn't required?
Yes, sorry, it wasn't required.
I might be belaboring this point a little bit, but I'm going to go back to it. The Aboriginal education program funding that we get, it is targeted. We have a requirement to spend those funds in the year that we receive them, so I'm curious why we would assume that we should be carrying some of it forward again. I guess what I'm thinking is more forward thinking in terms of if it's related to staffing, that's one thing. And that's, I had another conversation about this, plan A is to staff for this. But if we get to a certain point in the year where we know we haven't spent those funds, then what's our next step? We should still be looking at spending those funds on the students that are bringing that in the year that they're here, because we've brought the money into the district because they're here, and so the money should be spent on them. And then if Plan B fails, then there should be a Plan C as well. I guess I'm sharing that I'm concerned about that, and that I would like to make sure that we have multiple contingency plans in place so that we quit doing this, because it has been several years in a row that we do this. And I can take it back to PAC training. We would always say you don't save your money for a rainy day 10 years down the road. You spend it on the money. You spend the money on the kids that are here today. So I guess I just really want to ask what we are going to be doing to make sure that we have more than one plan with regards to that particular fund. And it's fairly rhetorical at the moment, but I do want to plant that seed right now.
I'm just expressing agreement.
Me too. Anyone else before we allow?
Just to follow up on that, I think that is an issue that we've been wrestling with for a number of years, that's been pointed out by our chair. And part of the purpose of the surplus policy and the new reporting under the surplus was to be able to be aware of it, and to be able to, during those, start having quarterly reports where we start to become more aware of it. And part of it also comes from a shift in behavior, where there were so many years of the quarterly reports involved being in the red and having to scrape back, that for many years people were just really happy we weren't in the red, and suddenly we went in this shift. So there is a new behavior happening. Part of it had to do with all those really tough budget decisions that were made a few years ago that allowed us to have some breathing room that we've never had before. So this is part of a behavior shift that has to happen, and I echo your concern. I think it's a good one to bring up, that we do need to start paying attention to these line items in the quarterly reports, not just for where are we in the red, but where are we going to have money left over so that we can start addressing them. It's just it's a behavior shift on the part of the board as well.
Agreed. Trustee Stanley.
If I can piggyback on that a little bit and agree that everything that has just been said by the two previous speakers. I want to also express concern about the school supplies underspending. I hear the rationale, but in the context of updating the curriculum, and in the context of reconciliation being a board goal, we have a lot of resources that could be used in our schools. So I understand saving for a rainy day or big purchases, but I feel like our classrooms can use these school supplies and resources now. And if our schools are having to save their school supply budget to make bigger purchases, then I think that is a question that we need to look at. What are those bigger purchases that our schools feel like they're needing to save up for? So in the context of parents talking to us about schools, classrooms lacking in resources, or at least that's the story that we hear among parents, I just want to kind of express concern about that as well.
I would agree with that. And Trustee Barron.
Thank you, through the chair. I was hoping that we could consider, for moving forward, a means for us to be able to clearly visually see how the allocation of our surplus is aligning with our policy and our procedures that we have in place. Looking at this, it's very challenging to see where the surplus fits within the surplus policy, and to be able to understand whether we are below the minimum and maximum amounts that are allocated, and all the work that's put into these policies and procedures. It would be nice to have a clear visual diagram that shows us what is where, and to show us that we are following what's been put into place. Question. Is that something we've considered?
Well done. That was well done.
Can I answer that?
You may.
So I did do the calculation on the percentages as far as what is our percentage for internal and unrestricted, restricted and unrestricted balances, to check that they were in line with the policy, but I just didn't come up with anything pretty to show you that it is. So that's definitely something we can look at doing, just to.
Provide it with that at some point when you have it?
Yeah.
Great.
Mr. Zver, I saw your hand. Ms. McGonagall, were you also trying to say? Okay.
Just based on when I look, you know, when you look at the budget, and you asked about school supplies and Aboriginal education programs, and it's targeted in one's school supplies. When I look at the amount of schools and stuff we deal with, and one that always is asking for something to be found, you know, I look at it as very prudent that the school district is doing that. There is stuff that you cannot buy, that cannot be received by June 30th. It may come in July 5th and then charged the previous year because of the timing and shipping of paying for it. So the money could be spent before even school starts up from previous school supplies. It's balancing the budget on the day that it ends. So in the old days, I used to see them out there. There would be the cheat sheets for the principals to spend their money, please get it in, because they were worried about losing it.
Yeah.
And we were buying stuff that wasn't necessary. So talk about doing one or the other when you say, do we need the supplies or not? We're all in a need. It's trying to find the balance. What I look at is the unrestricted operating surplus of $1.2 million. That didn't come from anything else other than came from more than likely not providing the services that should be there. That is the difference between looking at something that's restricted and coming over to something that has no attachment. And we're worried about 300, and there's 1.2 million right there that you could allocate back out to the schools to fund some of the projects that you said, or some of the stuff that we may or may not need. But to say that maybe the schools need to spend more of their own supply money, as one that sits here and asks for a lot of stuff, I don't think would be well off, because in the end of the day, when we need to find more, we're going to have to cut somewhere to put it back. Cautionary on the piece, but unrestricted funding is money that was allocated somewhere else that wasn't used and wasn't intended on being used other than on services, and those services are lost.
Okay. Trustee McKay.
Thank you. On note 12, and I'm sorry, my page number's not matching anybody else's, so I don't know what page that is. I have a question under
46.
the operating, internally restricted, staffing and unusual expense reserve. Are all three of these line items included under staffing and unusual expense reserve? Or are they split between two different reserves according to our procedure? Maybe what I'll do, if I might explain why I'm asking
Yes,
the
please.
question. When I calculate these three things combined under the way that they're presented, so the page says internally restricted staffing and unusual expense reserve. Our procedure states that that reserve is 0.5% to 1% of actual operating expenses of that fiscal year. So when I do that calculation, if those three items are combined, they are over and above the maximum of 1%. So my question is, are they actually accountable under staffing and unusual expense reserve, or should they be split between two separate reserves? Because the staffing contingencies, 950 and 750, would fit under staffing and unusual reserve. Perhaps Quam belongs under planning reserve as opposed to the same, because we should be living within those percentages, and that does not add up right now.
You want to speak to that?
I don't have the surplus policy in front of me, but I think there's also another category that's unexpected or emergent. I just don't have it in front of me right now. So, there we go.
Procedure?
I think I need the procedure.
You need something that's in the procedure, not the policy.
Oh, see, I can have the electronic version.
There you go.
Page 4.
I was thinking of the emergency / project reserve. It could be viewed as also a project, which is kind of a one-time money that we've set aside. So, to answer
So
your
then I would
question.
ask that the accounting reflect that appropriately in the statements that we're being asked to approve at the end of the month.
Yes, we could do that.
You may.
My understanding, though, on this was that it was a bit higher because of the CEF having to be put here.
Those calculations fit the percentages, if they're not combined.
Yeah, my thinking though is that we talked about it being higher than usual in June because we had to plunk this 10% somewhere. Is that one of the reasons why it's higher? Because we had to put 10% somewhere that they were holding back, and they were holding back on CEF?
Yes, so typically the staffing contingency would be we would normally, and we have for many years, put aside $750,000. So one of two things could happen when we get to that point. We would come to the board and we could either release that and put that in unrestricted, which would probably be wise at this point. And or if as we're monitoring things, it looks like we may have a shortfall for COMCOM, we could also increase that reserve. So I think that I understand that we want to see more alignment with the policy, but this is also an area that I think you have flexibility in terms of monitoring as we go throughout the year. And the short answer was, yeah, it's higher than it was initially intended to be.
Trustee McKay, do you have anything? Would you have recalled there?
No, I'll hold with it, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Keller?
Just a question, maybe perhaps for staff, for the chair. How many current unfilled positions do we have in the district, and how does that relate to our surplus?
Chair? That would be something I'd have to get back to you on for sure, but information we can provide. You're looking at as of right now?
Well, yeah, just through the chair, just looking at note 12 and the surplus that's proposed, and I'm trying to in my head relate that to positions that are currently unfilled and what our strategy might be if we do have positions unfilled to address it.
We would need some time to get that.
Yeah.
We would need some time, and I'm not so sure that at this point in the year, the information would be as helpful as perhaps after our first quarter, just because it's so early in the school year. But I think that information would be really helpful for finance to present when we do our first quarterly report.
Trustee Barron, did you have a question?
Yes.
Anything related to? Yeah, go. Ashley. No, I'm just trying, no.
Yeah, well, through the chair. Well, yes, and I was wondering, because you may have, and I'm apologies, what was your name again?
Kylie. Sorry.
Kylie, my apologies. I'm not sure if you were going to address this, so perhaps I could wait till the end of the presentation to see if my question has been answered.
Sure.
If you had more that you wanted to present.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we could keep me on the list.
Absolutely. Mr. Zver, can you?
I'll wait.
Thank you. Then I'll let you get back to it.
Okay.
All right.
Find our page here.
Can you, through the chair, can you direct us to the page you're
Yes.
standing back and
So
on?
I was looking at the financial statement discussion and analysis. If you would surplus chart on page 82, but it might be useful to also look at financial statement note 12 as well. They go hand in hand.
Yeah, thank you.
So whichever you prefer. So we've gone over the $2,075,000. So the remainder of the restricted balance is the $1.1 million for the targeted reserve. And that's essentially for projects that have been started in 2018-19, but just not finished yet. So that's for things such as vehicles that were purchased, but we didn't receive them until after the fiscal year end. So there were some appliances, a mental health grant that hadn't been spent yet that we threw in there, $180,000 for fire plans that the district has no choice but to do due to WorkSafe requirements. So that's sort of what that 1.1 million, and there really is no flexibility on that balance. So that gives us a total restricted balance of 3.2 million, and then an unrestricted balance of 1.2 million. And then I was going to move on to the capital fund. So the capital fund surplus consists of 49 million in investment in TCA, so investment in tangible capital assets, and 5.6 million in local capital. So So I just wanted to highlight that the investment in tangible capital assets balance is essentially the assets that the district has purchased using district funds. So that's not actual money that we have available to us. But the local capital balance of 5.6 million is the balance that the district has the discretion to allocate to strategic capital projects. So some of the projects identified for that 5.6 million include the district's Wi-Fi initiative, annual technology plan, enrollment growth space needs, the learning studios, Power School reimplementation, school signs, so just to name a few. And then you'll also notice that we've got a proposed transfer of 1.25 million going from the operating fund to local capital, and that's to support the Hannah Bay expansion that is expected to start this year. Yeah, so that's kind of the high level of the surplus, high level detail. And that was kind of all I was planning on touching on, but I know there's a ton of information in here. And as I said, the auditors are coming to present the audited financial statements in detail and their audit findings report. So really just wanted to give you guys this in advance to hopefully answer some questions before that meeting. And so I'll open it up if you guys have any more questions.
All right, at the moment I've got Trustee Barron, Mr. Zver, Trustee Keller, Trustee McKay, and Trustee Stanley. Is that good? Is that right? Everybody? Trustee Barron.
Yes, thank you, Kylie. Just to clarify, I'm really thankful for the opportunity for you to present this to us now. I am looking at this as an opportunity for us to be able to dig a little deeper, to hear from our partners, and to be able to work together around what information is most relevant for us to be asking the auditors when we do meet with them. So for me, it's a bit of a process that I'm happy that you're a part of, to be able to answer our questions as we dig a little deeper in here. So my question was around on page 90 and 40. I noticed they're both, sorry, but there's two corresponding documents here. On note 7, page 40, and it also speaks to it on page 90. On here, there is a, this is the CEF adjustment, I believe, that Trustee Higginson was speaking to. Would that be correct? I was hoping to get some information around what that was.
Sorry, I'm just trying to find where you're looking.
So it says on page 90 that there's an adjustment that's been made in 2017, 2018 for an error in 2016, 2017 in which expenses were understated.
Yeah, so that adjustment actually relates to school-generated funds. So the way, this is not complicated, but the way that those accounts work is essentially schools have, we call them Fund 60 accounts, and they report all their revenue, all their expenses into one GL account. And then for reporting requirements, we of course need to identify the revenues and the expenses. So we separate that out using Excel. So essentially in 16-17, there was an error where 3 months were missed, and it wasn't caught until the 17-18 fiscal year. So and then in 2017-18, there was an additional $300,000 that had to be put through that essentially was related to the previous year. So it's kind of overstated the prior year's balance. So that's what that relates to.
Could I just have a follow-up comment? Okay. I feel like it would be helpful for us. I know that this document, which I really appreciate because it provides a lot of additional information to the statements, being a public document, I think it would be helpful for us to just add maybe a further sentence of clarification, because when I read this, my mind starts going around all the different possible, options that could be around an error. So it might be good for us just to clarify, if it's, for transparency, what it is that we're talking about there. So it doesn't turn into something bigger than it is, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that was a statement, sorry.
Okay, it's okay. Mr. Zver.
One of the questions I have, and I don't know how to flesh it out, is we obviously in the facilities department don't have full complement of getting red sealed workers. So when the contractors are billing, where do they go under? where do they show up in the thing? Do they come under a supplies? Do they come under a different service agreement? Because all I see is amount that says about $700,000 less in the amount that was actually budgeted for operations. But then I don't see anything that would say what did we pay for outside services that would have came in lieu of the fact that we cannot find internal in the HVAC and electrical and other areas. Where would that show up in the budget? Like, where do they get billed to? I know I can get it from the Sophie in the end of the day. If they're over $25,000, I'll find it. But
So are you asking about the specific companies or?
well, where does it all, it has to get lumped in somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Does it just go into services?
So that falls under operations and maintenance costs. And then if you're looking on Schedule 2C, I believe, it would fall under services and supplies. So I'll see if I can find the page number.
Page 57.
Maureen's on it. So page 57, if you look, so you can see 1 instruction, 4 district admin, 5 operations and maintenance. So if you look in that row, under services and supplies is where that would fall under.
So 3 million and then what, but there is no line item that was actually would have said what was budgeted, right? I don't know if that's over or under.
Yeah, so that's not detailed in these statements, but something we could get to. I think Maureen has something she wants to add.
I did do an analysis of that because it's something that Pete Sable has been bringing up about the fact that we can't fill positions. And so the analysis proved out that yes, we didn't hire, we had a surplus in staffing in the maintenance department. And we had a deficit in the contracted services in the maintenance department. So, you know, because it was only partway through the year, they almost balanced out. So overall, the department didn't actually see much of a deficit, but that was a part year.
I'm just curious to see what it cost us, that's all. Thank you.
Trustee Kelly? Okay, Trustee McKay. Thank you. My question is, what is our unrestricted surplus based on our audit? I've worked on it, what I think is right, but I don't know if I'm looking at the things, at the papers correctly.
The final unrestricted surplus balance after the transfer. Yeah, so it's about $1,251 after the transfer of 1.25 million to local capital.
And so was on the to the business committee and the board, I think it's important for us to recognize that that's not a typical financial position for us to be sitting in, and that typically our unrestricted funds should be more than that, for us to be considering what potential risks that we face as an organization. So I'm uncomfortable with that number. I'm not sure what to do about that, but I'm very uncomfortable with that number, and I think it was important to say here today.
Thank you. Trustee Stanley.
Okay. I actually have a really simple question because I haven't heard of this phrase before. Didn't realize I was up next. Help me out. It was how we were spending our capital funds, and it was power something. So maybe if I can find that page. Power School. What's Power School?
Do you want me to answer that?
Power School reimplementation.
Yes, so right now, HR, finance, and payroll are going through kind of refreshing our finance system that we use. So Power School is the company, and Atrieve is the actual program itself that we use. So that we're kind of towards the end stages of that now, but doing a full kind of revamp on a system that's kind of backlogged with years and years and years of data. I don't know, Maureen is kind of the boss on that, so she might have something to add.
I don't think I've really got anything to add, but our go-live date is next month, and so we're working frantically right now to finish the project so that when we do the changeover is going to happen over a weekend, and all of a sudden it's going to be 100% different from the way it was. But we're getting 30 years worth of old data removed from the system at the same time and archived, so it should provide a huge amount of extra efficiency to the whole organization.
Trustee Mann?
Thank you. Through the chair. Could you please clarify the factors that have attributed to the unrestricted surplus amount that we currently have being so low? Are there some considerations that led us to this low number at this current point in time that are unique to this specific year?
So I think the biggest thing is that there's been a large amount of money transferred from operating to local capital. So although the district only has $1,000 in unrestricted operating surplus, after considering the proposed transfer, there is $6.8 million sitting in local capital. That's essentially it's like another unrestricted pot. It's just for specifically capital purposes as opposed to operating. So that's really the main reason, is because there's just been a lot of local capital projects happening. And so there's been more transfers than I think there has been in the past.
Trustee McDaniel.
It's funny because I was going to leave this one for later. So I'm asking a rhetorical question for the board to consider, but when we're looking at 6 million, I think is the number we just heard, that's already in the local capital, I can't help but wonder if the board should be reconsidering the transfer of 1.25 million for Hammond Bay and rejigging what's already in the capital project fund for Hammond Bay and considering the impacts on those. I think it's a discussion that we should probably have, because if we were to do that, that leaves money in our operating fund, which would leave our unrestricted surplus within a percentage that fits within our procedures. So I think it's something for us to grapple with, but something to consider.
Thank you. Mr. Gisbert?
Curious, as this is last year's money, the budget that's coming in the current year already has the built-in 1.5 for contingency and has other things that are already aligned. This money is last year's just allocation to somewhere, so it's whether it's in the capital project or if it's somewhere else. We not usually took the money unless it was earmarked, and it's usually pulled out of the budget before it's presented here and restricted. So any decisions that were made for the budget would have been in the restricted part of the money. Unrestricted means is nobody thought of where to put it, and they're going to put it into capital projects, which is what the board was meaning to do with most of their surpluses, was to try to build and do things for the district that they couldn't do through the government. That was the policy that started. That was the procedures for which people were putting the money away, and it come down to how much is too much. So I'm, you know, when I say somebody would say cautionary about where it goes, I think this year's budget will be healthy if it stays the way it is. Hopefully the government funds it fully. We won't know truly how healthy it'll be until the teachers reach their settlement. But at the end of the day, they said they would fund any increases. They would fund the wages. They would fund the classroom spaces that are required. And they have in the past by showing it. So I don't know through to the chair or in addition to Trustee McKay about the worry of the money from last year. It is a surplus. It's money that's sitting there that can be, and you can pull it out of local capital if you want by a motion. Remember, it doesn't have to stay there forever. It's only if it's goes to something else, I believe, but it can come out.
Trustee Keller.
Thank you, through the chair. So I too had some concern over the number of 1,500 from the amount we could use for surplus at the end of the day. But I'm kind of wanting to know a little bit about the process that would be involved should the board need to consider reallocating money from unrestricted to operating should there be any unforeseen circumstances through the year that might require that.
Is the question with regards to perhaps the staffing contingency and the replacement costs, if at one point throughout the year we felt that that money was not needed, we could unrestrict it?
It's more about the proposed surplus at the end of the year. And I don't have the figure in front of me. I don't know what note it's under. But I recall it was about $1,200 or $1,500.
Right.
And there was some concern raised by Trustee McKay that number was low.
Right.
So my question is, what does the process look like should the board get into a situation where more is required in operating? And how do we deal with that mid-year?
Right, so that what we could do and what we would do is, knowing the financial situation that we're in and being uncomfortable also, I think I can speak for finance staff as well, that $1,500 is not a lot to have in an unrestricted surplus contingency in case something unforeseen happened. However, we would very carefully monitor the staffing contingency and the replacement cost contingencies, and if we needed to unrestrict those for an emergency that came up, we would do that. Another suggestion that was made was around the transfer to local capital. That is something that we could consider doing during the amended budget or a little bit later on in the year if the board felt more comfortable with that. But it would mean rejigging some of our local capital projects and either putting some things off, which is possible. Yeah, but that is a consideration that it doesn't need to be done at this point in the year. It could be done.
Trustee Higginson?
So,
I missed Trustee Stanley.
Oh,
It's okay, go, let her go.
Okay, sorry.
So just in response to that too, so there is a process for us to have a motion to unrestrict if we want to, but we've also seen, as we're sitting here doing our surplus, that there is usually throughout the year surplus that occurs through often unfilled staffing positions that we are not able to fill. So when I look at the allocations in local capital right now, I think that most of them they're all very important projects, and rather than stopping some of those things that we've been trying to do for quite a while in case, because I'm also uncomfortable with this number too. Oh, how the tides have turned, right? Here we are uncomfortable about a low number in our surplus when we've been for years trying to get it down and talking about getting it down. But I think that I would prefer us knowing that we have other money in surplus that we can unrestrict at this point. And also that throughout the year, during our quarterly reports, we're going to be hearing about accumulated surplus of our current year's budget, so that we have seen enough, some of us who've been sitting here long enough, I know it's like this is like a lot, it takes a lot of years to figure these numbers out, enough that every year there is some money that's left, and so I'd rather us monitor it that way than right now start rejigging things for just in case situations. Because part of the reason why it's so allocated is because we have tried to be really thoughtful about what we want to do with the money as opposed to having it just sit there, where in previous years there was a time where that money would just sit there because we were so nervous about what would happen in the year. So that would be my preference, is that we closely monitor our current year's operating surplus and that we continue on with the projects that we've allocated money to.
Trustee Stanley and then Ms. Lee.
I'll take the opportunity to go after Trustee Higginson. I agree with what she just said. That was not my intended comment. My intended comment was, or question and comment was, first off, thank you for the clarity of this report. I had a number of questions that, as I got to the later end, were answered from the explanatory document. So thank you, I appreciate that. My question, although related, is somewhat different in nature. I have to express a lot of frustration at school districts having to fund capital projects through surpluses and using surpluses that are transferred into capital projects. I think it's entirely unacceptable, and I think it's a downloading provincial cost onto school districts. So I want to express that publicly because it's common, And I don't see a way around it right now. I mean, we need, new Wi-Fi. We need the Hammond Bay expansion. I get that. But I do want to put out there to this board, to the BCSDA, who we might have a connection to, I don't need an answer right now, but I think we need to have conversations about bringing this back up to a provincial level and talking about this, downloading the costs onto school districts. And so I would like to learn what we're doing both in our own organization and in the other related organizations, and I recognize it's a conversation for another time.
Thank you. I would agree with you. And Ms. Lee?
I have a concern just regarding the fact that the surplus is essentially gone. We, currently today, have a number of schools that are still awaiting decisions on divisions. So is this playing into that? Deciding out, hashing out numbers as to whether to add a division to a school or not, as we're already a week into the school year, and I certainly hope we don't have a repeat of last year at some of the schools. Because last year it was up to 3 weeks that we were waiting to get kids into classrooms, which...
We should have all classes organized by the end of the week. And to answer that first question about does this have something to do with, it has nothing to do with the time that it takes to organize the classrooms. We just had organizing kids in and out of schools and trying to deal with class size and composition issues.
Are there any other questions?
I had my hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Trustee McKay.
Thank you. Thank you for the comment from our DPAC rep. It's interesting because I've been connecting the work that we do around audit, because I believe that the work we do within the audit as a board feeds into how we budget for the following year. And I think that the board has a responsibility to look at how we staff schools and how tight many of our schools are, many of our classrooms are. And if there's surplus growing throughout the year, perhaps we should be planning ahead to keep that within operating, to loosen that up a little bit, as opposed to keeping it so tight so that those decisions are so difficult. And I think that that's something that we need to grapple with. So I do think that the work that we're doing and learning in the audit here is going to feed into our budget process for the future. That has a benefit to everybody, but keeping it in the operating side as opposed to capital.
Trustee Barron?
Yes, thank you. I have 2 questions and that'll be it. I was wondering if you could please clarify on page 85, I think it's my newness speaking here, but I'm not able to, off the top of my head, remember what specifically the employer health tax is, and I was wondering if you could clarify or provide some further information around that. The district also received the employer health tax.
Oh, on the funding side?
Yes, grant. Thank you.
Yeah, so I don't have the full technical kind of piece behind it, but essentially employers now have to pay an employee health tax as well as MSP, which is calculated at about, I think, 1.95% of total salaries. So that was a new thing that was implemented January 2019 to January 2020. And that money that we received is essentially the ministry trying to help fund the cost of that so that it's not coming from our operating funds.
Trustee Killer.
On that page 85 as well, do we have any indication why tuition has gone down to 51 FTE?
So I can't answer specifically as to what's happening within the international department, but it is due to just less FTE in general. So just less students compared to last year.
Yeah.
It's a space issue.
It's, so if I could just clarify, it's not so much that the demand has gone down, it's capacity.
Yeah.
That's correct.
I'll put you on the list because I think that's a good comment. Trustee Barron. No.
Follow the process. Thank you. My final question, hopefully. On page 49 of 110, note 17, contractual rights. I'm confused around this. If you could clarify, I noticed that our contractual rights starting 2020 and moving ahead is declining. And so this makes sense to me because I'm just going to guess that we're looking at the contractual rights that are currently in place and that those contracts are going to end, so they will inevitably dwindle over time. But if you could speak to A, what we're talking about specifically here, and B, is there any additional information that can support this that might provide us with a more realistic expectation of what these funds would look like moving into the future? Is there a combined sort of anticipated contractual information available to us?
Yeah, so you're essentially bang on that's why it's dwindling, is their contracts that generally some are maybe only on a year basis, and to hit the financial statement note, it has to be an actual contract. Even though the likelihood of it renewing is high, we would only put it in there for the 1 or 2 year period that the contract's actually for. So this is for like rentals of unused space, right? So we've got daycares in some of the district's space that's not being used, various other. I have a listing, so I can provide you with a list of kind of all the rentals we have, just so
Some
you can
examples are
see.
good, yeah.
And it'll have an expiry date, and that's sort of how this note is calculated.
Okay.
But it is, I think it would be hard to know exactly what the amounts would be going forward, just because it really just depends on what that group wants to do, if they want to renew or not, right?
So just to clarify, that's what was contractually in place at the time that this statement was put together?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Trustee O'Neill, were you having something you want to, no?
Okay, through the chair. It was more a comment, and that was, I think, in fact, with the international piece, I think it's more of the reverse, or at least that's my understanding, that really there is quite a bit of demand for that, but we don't have the space and to provide that. So hopefully in the future, we will get to that place, but yeah.
All right,
Just I guess I do want to make one final comment, because although we talk restricted, unrestricted, and movements of cash inflow, always go to the balance line. $4.5 million was the accumulated surplus the school district had. Decisions in that $4.5 million are laid out in here and how it should be spent. Next year, I imagine that $2 million that's under the one items won't be there for next year. And that potentially is probably a surplus for this year's budget, because they seem to roll in the same categories. When I presented, I said there would be a surplus of X, and there would be a surplus of Y, but we're always told don't ask for last year's money, because it's got to be new and ongoing. But we do have difficulties. We have places where there's funding required. We have, and on mine saying it right here, is we have a school, Woodlands, with students in, and no clerical help. They had it last year, but it was removed. Small piece, but now they don't have that. Essentially, we've downsized something with nobody telling us that it would happen. It just happened, disappears. And we see some increases that weren't in the budget, right in the DAC of jobs that have been added. And they weren't in the budget. And that's where you try to look at the audited, what was and what wasn't, and how do you balance it for how many jobs weren't filled in CUPE? 4. Very high-end jobs. 2 in IT, 2 across the wide facilities, probably 3 now in facilities. Can't hire them. That money is still in the budget, but nobody is doing the current work. I've asked for the jobs in IT to be posted. They haven't come out yet. So there is money being held back that's already earmarked, that's not being utilized. And you asked the question and nobody wanted it, but I'll give you an answer that's close to what it's there. And there's more. So it's good to have, an audited statement that says we're financially healthy, but in some cases we're also not doing the services for which we even budgeted. and we need to look at how we're gonna maintain that size. So with the teachers, when they don't have remedy for themselves, how do we fix that?
Right, thank you. Okay, I think that we've all had probably actually, Trustee Robinson, you haven't said anything. Is there anything you? Yeah.
I had quite an evening
I thought so.
before arriving here.
So you're, okay, yeah.
Fine.
Thank you. All right, seeing that, I think we have agreed, then are we going to not then do the motion tonight? Okay, then we will move forward to the next item on the agenda, which is exempt compensation reporting.
That's item 8.4 on page
8.1, yeah, 8.4.
95. But before we just move on, I just wanted to express, I think something like that. My thanks to Kylie for coming and presenting tonight, and also thank you to our Associate Secretary Treasurer Maureen Hambley, I think, has she ducked out? Nope, she's still there. So to both of you, hours and hours of work behind the scenes, so thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Kylie, great job navigating all those lines.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Kylie, I apologize, I was remiss in not acknowledging you there. You did a wonderful job.
Thank you. That's a lot of information.
Yeah.
I'm learning what you all want to know still, so.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
When you figure it out, let us know.
That's right.
I already gave her some bad advice because I said that probably tonight's meeting would be more high level and a lot more questions would come at her on the 25th. So, my apologies.
I prefer this though, because then it's in advance of, when you actually need to make a decision, that's the point of this tonight, so.
Well, and very good questions, good discussion. So sorry, moving on to, again, page 95 is the exempt compensation report that is required every year to be filed, and then ultimately is uploaded on all school district websites and through PSEC. So the recommendation is that the business committee recommends that the Board of Education receive the exempt compensation report as information and direct the board chair to sign the attestation letter acknowledging the compensation paid to executive staff. The report that follows is similar to other years. It simply talks about our compensation philosophy, how BCPC arrives at labor market comparators and salary ranges. And then on starting on page 100 is the actual compensation disclosure for the 5 top decision makers as defined by PSEC. I know that's how they define it. So that's the requirement of the compensation that needs to be listed in terms of salary, benefits, pension, all other compensation. And it also provides comparator years. So also you'll see 17-18 and 16-17.
Okay, thank you. So this one I think is pretty straightforward, I think. Yes.
I have a question / comment that I'll try to ask in the form of a question. No, I think we're just allowed to make comments right now. This is not a presentation. So I just, my page numbers are different. Let's see, because I'm using one from another one. 101 on the vacation payouts. I would feel remiss if I didn't bring this up for 2 reasons. One, it appears that our most senior decision makers, is that the title, are having a really hard time taking vacation, and that concerns me. Because for the mental health and well-being of our senior decision makers, it makes me concerned, and I would pass that over to you to hope that everybody is not burning out. And it concerns me because it's a lot of money, right? And I don't want people to feel guilty about not taking vacation because holy cow, it's that you're here. But I just, if I multiply that by a number of school districts, that's a lot of cash, So it's concerning that that's money that's leaving the system as a result of people who are working really, really hard. It's not your fault, but that's the way it is. I just am concerned for the mental health and well-being of our senior staff when they can't take vacation. And I know there was a lot of change this year. Maybe it's just because everybody was so new in their jobs, it becomes harder. But I just bring that to your attention for the 2 reasons already stated.
Okay, thank you. Yes, trustee Stanley?
I thank you for trustee Higginson's comment on that, and I would like to echo it. If you need me to write you a doctor's note, I'm happy to. But I think that you are role models. I can do that, it's great. I think that you are role models in our school district too. And so you set the tone, and it is important for you to take care of your mental health and well-being. Yes, I'm looking at the person who's got the most. No, because, you know, our staff also need to know that it's okay to take care of themselves and take breaks. And so I think it is perhaps important for us to say we care about you and you're important and your burnout is not good for us. And so, you know, to whatever extent that it's not working for you to be able to take care of yourselves or take a break, then that's a conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah.
So, and I think as well, because it trickles down, and we need to let our principals know that, and our janitors know that, and our teachers know that too.
Absolutely, well said. Mr. Zver, and then Mr.
Yeah, I'm
Trustee
just
Keller.
curious, one question is, you know, vacation payout, is that part of the other quotation, like you get your 35 days and it's the 120 factor that creates the payout?
I'm not sure if I understand the question again completely,
Well, there's two
but
vacation pieces mentioned in your compensation, right?
yeah.
You're entitled to 35 days and then the 120th for attending meetings outside of the normal, 5 out of 20 days, I should say. of
Right,
paid
there's a
time off
range.
in the piece. Is that what is based mainly being paid out, or it's just not taking vacation at all? I'm just trying to get a feel for when somebody says. it's a
So
burnout.
that rolls into vacation, and staff can't carry forward any more than 2 weeks of vacation to the next year. So if a certain amount of vacation hasn't been taken, it has to be paid out.
Mr. Sebo, were you gonna add to that?
No,
Okay.
say the same thing.
Okay. Mr. Keller, Trustee Keller?
I was just hoping I could move the recommendation.
All right. Seconded by Trustee Higginson. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried unanimously. Yes. All right, and I believe we have one more item. Find it here. Secretary Treasurer McVeigh, regard 8.5 regarding school site land acquisition. An update.
Actually, it's simply attached for information on page 104 of the agenda, and it's a paper that was sent out by BCSTA talking about potential changes to school site acquisition fees. So I don't know if there are any questions. I won't get into this a whole lot right now, other than to say we've talked about referring this issue to the long-range facilities plan, and school site land acquisition fees are not something that the school district are currently collecting or have been collecting in quite a long period of time. So even before this paper came up, it was something that we want to bring forward in the long-range facilities plan. So it's just timely. It's something that we'll need to look at.
Trustee Keller?
I don't know if anyone here will be able to answer this, but has BCSTA consulted with local governments around the language in here, because it's not very accurate?
I believe there was a list of who's on the committee. Sorry.
Oh,
Everybody
sorry.
looked at me, so I just.
Totally
Yeah.
expecting you to answer this.
I was just totally waiting for your answer. So, yeah, I believe that they sent out a list with who's on the committee. I do not believe there was any local government reps on the committee, which I think what you've pointed out is there was a number of secretary treasurers, a number of, education sector people, and I think you're pointing out that there is a disconnect in local governments and schools, how this is done, which is problematic and part of the conversation that needs to be had. So we welcome your feedback. I think you sent out some really great questions that I think if the board would like to send on, they certainly can. And BCSTA is in the process of signing a memorandum of understanding with UBCM. in a couple of weeks to encourage us to work more closely together, specifically on things like this. So I think those types of questions that you have are great questions, because this is EduSpeak, and then there's local government speak, and we need to make them work together. So.
Okay. All right.
By the end of September, though, you need to get that feedback in.
Okay, go.
It was good feedback, like really good feedback, and I would encourage us as a board to move it forward to the people who should be hearing it.
Okay. All right. No correspondence. No unfinished business. No new business.
Mr. Robinson?
Oh, yes, sorry. Trustee Robinson?
Given that I was late this evening for the first time in 8 years, and not just a little late, I feel the board deserves an explanation. I have been dog sitting for a friend, usually a very well-behaved dog. At 5:15, we approached my car, and he decided he didn't want to go home.
Uh-oh.
So he spent the next hour and 10 minutes running off and on a very busy road. I had people flagging cars down through the woods. And it took an hour and 10 minutes to get said dog into my car and home. So my apologies, but I couldn't leave him there.
No, of course not. Glad you made it.
And he's a lovely dog.
Just
And
glad
I
you're
had
okay.
a walking stick, and he's just lucky. Anyway.
We're just glad you're okay. And on that note, a motion to adjourn. Trustee
There were no-
Stanley. Oh,
There were no questions?
no, there were no questions? I'm sorry. Trustee Stanley and Trustee O'Neill. All right. All in favor? Didn't think that anyone